Jeffrey Epstein's story is not a straight line from innocence to evil. It is a slow construction built piece by piece over decades, inside systems that rewarded discretion and punished disruption. He was born in 1953 in Brooklyn, New York. His family was middle class. There was no inherited fortune, no political dynasty, no obvious path to the circles he would later inhabit. As a young man, Epstein was intelligent, quiet, and observant. People who encountered him early often described him as someone who blended into the background, someone who learned more by listening than by speaking. That habit would later become central to his rise. In the early 1970s, Epstein began teaching at the Dalton School, one of Manhattan's most elite private schools. The position itself raised questions. He lacked formal teaching credentials, but the school served families whose wealth and influence reshaped expectations. At Dalton, Epstein was exposed daily to privilege at close range. He watched how power behaved when it felt safe. He learned how wealth insulated people from scrutiny. He learned how trust was extended not through proof, but through appearance and association. He left the school after a few years under circumstances that were never fully explained. What mattered was what he took with him, an understanding of elite culture and the confidence to move within it. Epstein entered finance without a conventional resume. By the late 1970s, he was working at Bear Stearns, a major Wall Street firm. His role was unusual. He was not a traditional trader chasing public markets. Instead, he positioned himself as someone who managed money privately for extremely wealthy clients. Over time, he began claiming that his clients were so rich and so secretive that their identities could not be disclosed. This explanation was rarely challenged. In elite circles, secrecy is often mistaken for sophistication. Epstein understood that ambiguity could function as authority. The less people knew, the more important he appeared. By the 1990s, Epstein had amassed extraordinary wealth. He purchased a massive townhouse on Manhattan's Upper East Side, one of the largest private residences in the city. He bought a sprawling estate in Palm Beach, Florida. He acquired a ranch in New Mexico, an apartment in Paris, and later a private island in the U.S. Virgin Islands. He owned private jets and traveled constantly. But Epstein did not present himself merely as a rich man. He reinvented himself as a benefactor of knowledge. He donated to universities. He funded scientific research. He hosted dinners where academics, technologists, politicians, and business leaders mingled. He positioned himself as a bridge between money and ideas. This strategy placed him inside institutions that value reputation and discretion above transparency. Once inside, he became difficult to question without threatening those institutions themselves. While Epstein's public life expanded, another reality unfolded quietly. Teenage girls began appearing around him with disturbing consistency. Many were underage. Many came from vulnerable circumstances, financial instability, family problems, lack of support. Some were recruited directly. Others were brought in by girls who had already been drawn into Epstein's world. The recruitment process was deliberately understated. A girl might be offered money for a massage. The amount seemed significant to someone young and desperate. The task sounded simple. Inside Epstein's home, the atmosphere was controlled and confusing. Boundaries were crossed gradually, not violently. Survivors later described how nothing felt immediately shocking, which made it harder to resist or report. Over time, the abuse escalated. Sexual acts followed. Control followed. Girls were paid, then reminded they had been paid. They were told to bring others. They were discouraged from talking. Fear replaced confusion. Silence replaced resistance. This pattern repeated for years. Complaints reached authorities long before Epstein became a public scandal. Parents contacted police. Victims gave statements. Investigators noticed similarities in accounts. By 2005, the Palm Beach Police Department launched a serious investigation after receiving multiple reports involving minors. Investigators gathered extensive evidence. Dozens of girls provided consistent testimonies, locations matched, methods repeated. The case was strong enough to support severe charges. Then, the momentum disappeared. Federal prosecutors became involved. Negotiations began behind closed doors. In 2008, Epstein reached a plea deal that would later become infamous. Despite credible allegations involving the sexual abuse of minors, Epstein pleaded guilty only to minor state charges. He avoided federal prosecution entirely. The deal was extraordinary not only for its leniency but for its secrecy. Victims were not informed. Some learned about it only after it was finalized. The agreement included broad protections that shielded Epstein and potential associates from further charges related to the case. Epstein was sentenced to just over a year in jail, but even that sentence was hollow. He was allowed to leave the jail 6 days a week for up to 12 hours a day under a work release program. He returned to his office. He conducted business. He lived comfortably. At night, he returned to jail. To the public, it appeared that justice had been served. To those who understood the details, it was clear that justice had been negotiated away. For survivors, the impact was devastating. Many felt erased by the system that was supposed to protect them. Some stopped speaking. Others were pressured to move on. The message was unmistakable. Power could neutralize accountability. After his release, Epstein resumed his life with remarkable ease. He traveled internationally. He attended events. He remained surrounded by influential figures. His private island, Little St. James, became a recurring destination. Planes arrived, boats docked, guests went and came. For years, there were no consequences. But silence has limits. Journalists began re-examining the case. Investigative reports exposed the plea deal and the failures behind it. Survivors began telling their stories publicly. Public outrage grew. The narrative shifted from an isolated scandal to a systemic failure. In 2019, federal prosecutors in New York arrested Epstein again, this time on charges of sex trafficking minors. The language was direct, the accusations detailed, the evidence substantial. For the first time, Epstein was being held in a federal facility under serious charges. As the case progressed, scrutiny widened. Flight logs were released, contact books surfaced. They did not prove guilt by association, but they revealed proximity. Powerful names appeared as connections, raising uncomfortable questions about who had known what and when. Survivors spoke in greater detail about Epstein's private island. They described being flown there, isolated from the outside world, surrounded by adults who never questioned their presence, a place where wealth erased boundaries and responsibility dissolved. For the first time, it seemed possible that Epstein might testify, that names might be spoken under oath, that the full structure of his operations could be exposed. Then, abruptly, everything ended. In August 2019, Epstein was found dead in his jail cell. The official ruling was suicide, but the circumstances immediately raised doubts. Guards failed to perform required checks, cameras malfunctioned, records were incomplete. Epstein had previously been placed on suicide watch and then removed. Regardless of interpretation, the result was irreversible. Epstein was gone. His death ended the criminal case against him. There would be no trial, no cross-examination, no sworn testimony. Whatever information Epstein possessed died with him. In the years that followed, survivors pursued justice through civil lawsuits. Some settlements were reached, including from Epstein's estate. Financial compensation was provided, but money does not replace truth, and civil cases do not produce full public accountability. Documents were unsealed slowly. Many remained sealed. Names were redacted. The public received fragments rather than answers. The term Epstein files became shorthand for that absence, not proof of fantasy or speculation, but evidence of limitation. Evidence that the full truth exists, yet remains locked behind legal barriers, private agreements, and institutional self-preservation. What remains undeniable is this: Epstein did not operate in isolation. Abuse on this scale requires tolerance, sometimes active, often passive. It requires systems that prioritize reputation over responsibility, institutions that calculate risk instead of enforcing principles, cultures that silence victims when their stories threaten powerful interests.
This is why the story refuses to end, because it is not only about Jeffrey Epstein. It is about how power protects itself, about how easily justice can be delayed when consequences are inconvenient, about how many warnings can be ignored before accountability becomes unavoidable. Epstein is dead, but the mechanisms that allowed him to thrive, those mechanisms remain. And as long as they remain, this story is not finished. It is not history. It is a warning.